Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and today I am going to do a bit of a build diary looking back at a character that has successfully taken down Kitava in Act 10 of Solo Self-Found Hardcore Ruthless mode. In case you've missed it, my league goal since coming back for the 320 Forbidden Sanctum League has been for me to play Ruthless mode and to really get re-familiarized and reacclimated with Path of Exile. I've been gone for about a year or so, and so I thought, what the heck, since I'm coming back to PoE, the best way, or maybe the worst way, I don't know, you can think about that in multiple ways. But the way that I decided to come back and refresh myself with PoE was to jump in headlong into Ruthless and try and get one character from each of the 7 base classes through Act 10 in Hardcore Solo Self-Found Ruthless mode. So those were the parameters of the challenge that I set for myself, and that has given me a vision and direction and a goal for this league, and refreshing my memory of playing through the campaign and all the various mechanics and being brought up to speed with where the game is at the moment and where Ruthless mode is at presently on release in its initial first league that it's available to be played. So as you can see right next to my slightly balding forehead, we've got each of the characters and their progress displayed here. We've got 2 characters that are done. The first one that we're going to do today's discussion on is the Templar, which was completed as a Hierophant using the cold DoT archetype. In future video discussions, we will discuss the Juggernaut, which the Marauder, which decided to go Juggernaut and played Righteous Fire. That one was fun. That character basically broke down into like 6 different characters prior to becoming Righteous Fire, and then just one really strong character after becoming Righteous Fire, and then I'll tell the story of each of the other characters as they successfully take down Act 10 Kitava. Of course, as you can see over my left shoulder, over near your right-hand side of the screen, not every character has made it. I have had a couple of rips, most notably within the first week of the league, just coming back and refreshing myself playing Path of Exile again, and really finding what those choke points are, or what those checkpoints are for both DPS as well as health in Ruthless mode. It was pretty fun to see how early on how low power your characters can feel and how much power you're really missing in Act 1 and Act 2. You wouldn't think that you're missing that much power, but whatever power you're missing that early on really is noticeable. So for this Templar character, I decided to go with cold DoT as the archetype, and playing in Ruthless means that you don't have access to support gems. Support gems are drops only. At some point, I'm going to do an entire video discussion where we get into the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts and details of what makes Ruthless mode. But one of the big challenging aspects of Ruthless is that you are limited in both auras and support gems to being drop only. Those particular items are only available via drop, meaning if you are going to scale your character up, you're going to have to figure out how to scale your character without necessarily depending on particular support gems that you may or may not have access to early on. For me, I've gotten pretty lucky, I feel like, pretty consistently across the board in all my characters. Now, of course, I'm not running maps on any of my characters. I'm just progressing through the 10x story campaign. But I would say on average or so, I generally drop about 1 support gem per act while I'm progressing characters. So I've actually acquired several different support gems, and there's even a vendor recipe where if you get 3 support gems of the same color and you don't want to use them on any of your characters, you can trade those in to a vendor and get 1 random support gem back of the same color of the same 3 that you turned in. So there's some catch-up mechanism, or some hey, you haven't found a support gem that you can use yet, and it hopefully will turn out for you when you turn those 3 in. And I definitely took advantage of that with this Templar a couple of times with a couple of support gems that simply weren't going to fit this build or really any other build I could think to use. So for this Hierophant cold DoT character, here's my skill gem setup. Speaking of skill gems, in my weapon, I've got Hex Touch, I've got Vortex, and I've got Frostbite. You'll notice the level on these is level 10, level 14, level 8. This was set up essentially on my left click, so that way wherever you're walking around, you're always dropping a vortex, and as long as the vortex is actually hitting whatever your target is, it is then going to apply the Frostbite debuff to those monsters. In my helmet, I did have a 4-linked helmet that was set up with Vitality, Frostbolt, Frostbomb, and Eternal Blessing, which did drop for me, and that did help boost Vitality, so that way my defensive layer of regeneration was a little bit stronger than what it otherwise otherwise would have been. In my gloves, I had a 1-link cold snap only at level 9, and we primarily used that in order to generate frenzy charges. In my boots, I had a summon stone golem and a holy flame totem, which was useful for creating some consecrated ground from time to time, which again boosts my defensive layers for life regen. And in my body armor, we had Wintertide Brand. Level 15 Wintertide Brand did a lot of work for me. Now, if you're wondering, wow, Iron, that looks like a lot of different active gems to be micromanaging and to be using all at the same time. Well, during Ruthless, you're going to want to do that. You're going to want to have as many different sources of overlapping active damage as possible, because you're not necessarily going to have all of your regular tools through support gems and auras that you normally would have to increase your damage. So when I started the league, there were a couple of different ideas for builds that can have multiple different output sources of damage, and one of the strong ones, this was one of the strongest build archetypes and smoothest build archetypes that I've experienced in playing through Ruthless, which was the Cold Dot archetype, which allows for Vortex to be doing damage, Wintertide Brand to be dealing damage, Cold Snap to be generating frenzy charges, which is huge time. I mean, you can definitely feel the difference between on your build when you've got no frenzy charges versus when you've got 3 frenzy charges playing, and then Frostbolt and Frostbomb as some additional layers of either continual damage ongoing through Frostbomb's occasional detonation, or if you've got something that's in front of you that you can simply stand and tank, you can be throwing Frostbolts at it. In terms of my items here, this is where we all get to laugh, because this is all gear. Like, all of this gear would basically, none of it would sell for even a single chaos if we were in Trade League. Like, maybe there'd be 1 or 2 things that I would go, yeah, I'd use that in a normal league, but the vast majority of these things are just like absolute garbage in terms of their itemization. And yet, this particular build archetype, Cold Dot, does allow you to progress through the 10x story campaign and take down Kitava right around level 70 to 72, depending on how much you want to grind or overgrind. For us in the weapon slot, we had this particular wand called the Demon's Horn Sorrow Call. It gave us 32% increased spell damage. It also had on it a 21% increased cast speed, but the big thing for us was that it dropped and it had +1 to level of all cold spell skill gems. As soon as I identified this particular wand, I just went nuts over it, because this is going to up all of our various active sources of damage, whether it's Cold Snap, whether it's Wintertide Brand, whether it's Vortex, whether it's Frostbomb or Frostbolt. This is going to help all of those things. And I didn't even use Creeping Frost in the build. That's another thing that I could have done to add even more damage or more smoothness to the damage that I was actually using, but I simply chose not to use it. So this was our wand to take down Kitava. I did use a scepter for a long time. That was actually really, really helpful. It had a huge amount of elemental increased damage and a huge amount of spell increased damage. And basically, I think it carried me for either from like Act 4 through Act 9, or it might have been Act 5 all the way through Act 10. I might have found this wand pretty high up in either Act 8 or 9. I might have found it in Blood Aquas even. I'm not even sure exactly, or don't even remember exactly where I found it. But when we found this, I was genuinely shocked, because the scepter that I was using at the time, I thought there's no way that we're going to find anything better than this. In our shield slot, we've got a pretty decent shield in terms of its armor. It's got 424 armor. That's because it's got a 60% increased armor roll. Its implicit is 21 to life, 74 to maximum life, and then other than that, you gain some life when you block. Nothing really to write home about except some armor and some life. My helmet was a 4-link with 2 blue, 2 red, 18 to strength, 62 to life, 41 to maximum mana, and 9 to fire resistance. The mana does actually matter for our build, because our build went MOM, but we'll talk about more about that in a moment when we look at the tree. This was my body armor all the way up until the Kitava fight, and then once I got to the Kitava fight, I actually swapped off this piece for my body armor onto something that had 1,000 armor on it, and I believe it had much less life on it, but I figured I'm going to need to use the armor here rather than the life, and so I swapped off. But this got me all the way up through Kitava, and it just had 23 strength on it and 81 life and 700 armor. Again, nothing to write home about or to brag about, but for us over in Ruthless, it was pretty good. My gloves gave me 243 armor and 243 evasion, so pretty decent rolls there. Other than that, it just gave me some life regen and a little bit of cold resist. These boots are probably the second best thing that this character actually had. It's got strength on it, it's got armor on it, and then it's got some evasion. But the real juiced parts here for a find in Solo Self-Found Ruthless was that it rolled life, it rolled a resistance, and it rolled move speed. If you're wondering, oh, well, Iron, why don't you just use vendor recipes in order to get these particular rolls that you're wanting? A lot of the vendor recipes that we're used to using in regular Path of Exile are not available to us over in Ruthless. And so for us playing over there in Solo Self-Found, when you find something that's got, 2 or 3 stats on it that you can use, that's a really good find. In the amulet slot, I've got a magic amulet that gave me plus to all attributes as the implicit as an onyx amulet, and then it gave me some increased maximum energy shield, which we really didn't care about. I wasn't stacking energy shield at all. And then it gave me 8 to all elemental resistances, which really mattered a lot. Trying to cap your elemental resistances with basically just continually league starting your characters over and over again, not having access to trade, not having access to the crafting table as well. Ruthless does not have access to the crafting table. That's another big deal in Ruthless. So trying to cap out your resistances is a mixture of using whatever junk you can find as well as taking advantage of the passive tree. My rings are pretty decent. These are 2 rings that I'm pretty pleased that we were able to get. So first off, here's our 2-stone ring that gave us cold and lightning resistance. Then it gave us strength. It gave us some evasion. It gave us some ES, but it gives us life, increased rarity of items found, and then some fire resistance. So essentially, that is a triple resistance ring with life. That's all we could ask for, and that's what we got, and it carried us through. In the second ring slot, we've got the Soul Knot, which just gives a boatload of lightning resistance. The implicit was 23 lightning, then it also rolled 47 to life, 12 to all elemental resistances, and 29 to lightning resistance. I'm pretty sure I used this from like Act 5 on when I found it. In the belt slot, we've got another magic item, which was simply a heavy belt, giving us 30 strength and 37 to maximum life. A brief tip here on Ruthless is that when you're playing Ruthless, we figured this out as we've been progressing and playing on these characters. At least for me, I prioritize using my alchemy orbs in the Solo Self-Found environment on jewelry, like throwing alks at rings or at amulets. Really allows for hopefully 6 stats that are going to apply for your character. Whereas throwing an alchemy orb at, let's say, a belt or let's say a body armor, well, there's simply a lot more variables there. There's a lot more roles that might not apply to your particular build. So oftentimes you'll see on my characters that we're just using magic belts because oftentimes when I've found rare belts, they're just not as good. For my flask setup, I've got a life flask here that grants immunity to poison, which was pretty helpful. We've got a granite flask, which was very much needed, giving us 1500 armor while it's active. And then we've got a mana flask, which gained us back enough mana to essentially allow us to play with MOM with some level of confidence. Then I had a life flask of convocation to grant me freeze immunity and chill immunity. And then another hallowed mana flask, which also granted immunity to poison. And don't think this is because I crafted these this way. It's because we threw a transmute at it, didn't have enough alterations to respam it or to re-roll the particular item. And so again, you just roll with what you got. The main sources of damage for this build for the tree come from Divine Judgment coming over and grabbing the 50% increased elemental nodes over here on the left side of the tree near the Templar, and then also coming up and grabbing the damage nodes up by Breath of Rhine, as well as grabbing Disciple of the Forbidden. I wanted to come in and grab Disciple of Forbidden not only for the offensive output, but also for the mastery cannot be ignited while at maximum endurance charges, which I'm going to have maximum endurance charges on my character at all times because I'm playing as a Hierophant. We'll talk about that here in a second. But I wasn't able to roll on this character good flasks that were going to give me ignite removability. And so I wanted to make sure that my character wasn't simply going to die to a rather large ignite. And so in order to get around that, we used the charge mastery with a combination of maximum endurance charges. More about defenses, we came up through Cruel Preparation. Again, helps us solve all elemental resistance problems. Came over through Heart and Soul for life and maximum mana. Came over with Quick Recovery for more life, for more mana. Came over and went MOM, which our MOM numbers are not perfect. They're not even close to being perfect on the ratio. Believe me, I'm aware of it. But what can you do when you don't roll mana on items and you can't craft it? Also came up and grabbed Asylum, so that way we had some decent chaos resistance, and then grabbed the resistance and ailment protection mastery to give us, again, all elemental resistance and some chaos resistance. Because I'm paranoid about dying while playing this challenge, because a death for a character means I got to restart and replay through that character, I really went paranoid with my life, and I had a total of 157% increased life from the tree. I came up, I grabbed Purity of Flesh, came through Devotion, came over and grabbed Sanctum of Thought, came over and grabbed Combat Stamina, and then I went all the way down and grabbed the Constitution Wheel as well, just because I was paranoid. I wanted to have as much life as possible while keeping a relatively tight tree, really between these two far edges of Divine Judgment and Breath of Rhyme. At one point, I did have Heart of Ice, and I think I used my respec points throughout the campaign to respec some things as I was progressing, just because I found that there was better damage and better survivability by swapping off. I was essentially doing enough damage, I felt like, as I was progressing. Vortex felt so smooth. Just being able to walk through and drop down damage on stuff and stay moving. Staying mobile, especially in a game mode where you don't have mobility gems, is very, very important to your character's health. Let's wrap up the discussion in the diary on this character by talking about Ascendancy choices. I could have gone Guardian, I could have gone Inquisitor. There were plenty of people in chat as we were streaming making recommendations for those different particular options. Ultimately, the deciding factor, though, for me to go Hierophant was because of Conviction of Power. I figured with 4 minimum endurance charges, that meant that was going to be a huge boost to our physical resistances, as well as to our all elemental resistances as we continued to progress throughout the story. And then having those minimum power charges would also be a huge boost to our damage. I have found, especially after playing this character, that for my many years of playing Path of Exile, I have greatly undervalued charges, and coming back in and playing Ruthless in this particular challenge mode has made me value charges a lot more than I have in the past. Using Cold Snap in order to generate frenzy charges really felt good, and once you've got those frenzy charges up and running, your damage is noticeably better. And the same thing was true defensively and offensively by using Hierophant and Conviction of Power. I definitely could tell throughout the campaign having those power charges offensively and defensively, having those endurance charges floating around me at all times, keeping me safe. For my second Ascendancy, I went with Arcane Blessing. That granted me Arcane Surge when you or your totems hit an enemy with a spell. That was really, really good because we don't have Arcane Surge as a support gem that was available to us in Ruthless. So to simply have another opportunity to have a more multiplier whenever we're hitting, and we're hitting pretty often with this particular build, whether that's through Vortex or whether that's through Frostbomb or whether that's through Cold Snap. There's lots of different ways that you can be hitting with this particular build. Even your totems can also be hitting as well. So Arcane Blessing was constantly staying up for us, and then having that increased effect on Arcane Blessing onto your Arcane Surge, again, added to the smoothness of the damage output of the build. You'll note that I only did the lab twice on this character. That's right, I chickened out on doing the third lab before I killed Kitava. I figured I don't want to get this character all the way ready to Kitava and then go in and fight Azaro on a day when I'm just not paying attention to his mechanics, or I just step on a trap and die because I'm being a moron. I'd rather not do that. I'd rather not get a character all the way ready to kill Kitava, to progress my challenge and to progress my goals for the league, and then lose it because I was being a moron fighting Azaro. So I decided not to go for Azaro for the third fight, which in Ruthless you only get 3 Ascendancies, you only get 6 Ascendancy points. But if this was a full-on build guide for Ruthless, which is a little bit of what this is, I guess, a little bit of a diary, of a build diary, I was debating between going with Illuminated Devotion, which was going to give us a little bit increased of area of effect, which would have been nice. And then non-damaging ailments having reduced effect also would have been nice for things like chill that are constantly slowing you, etc. But what I ultimately decided on, since I'm playing in hardcore, was to probably go with Divine Guidance, which would have given us 30% increased maximum mana, another 10% of damage taken from mana before life, which would have pushed us really far up there. It would have given us a lot more mana and a lot more damage taken as mana before life, and then it would have given us Transfiguration of the Mind. So this was another great node as a mixture of offense and defense, because Transfiguration of the Mind gives you increases and reductions to maximum mana, also apply to damage at 30% of their value. Now, I don't have a lot of increased mana on my tree. I've only got 64%, so that would not have been a huge amount of increased damage. But in Ruthless mode, for those of you that have been watching the stream or playing Ruthless, you know how true this is. any increase feels good, right? So that was the thought process with Divine Guidance, primarily because of an additional 10% of damage taken from mana before life and a decent chunk of mana for a build that's only got 64% on the tree. 30% is a significant boost for us, and then any offensive output that would have been added to that simply would have been nice. Well, thanks for joining us for this little build diary. I'll be back with more of these. I've got lots of different videos to shoot and discuss. Our next build guide comparison is actually going to be comparing the cold DoT archetype with 3 different fantastic build guides that we're taking a look at. I've been doing work on that. That's going to come out here over the next couple of days, as well as our next build diary, talking about the Marauder and the Righteous Fire character and all that experience. What an experience and what a character that turned out to be, as well as continuing to live stream the progress of all these different characters right here on YouTube. So whether you're playing regular Path of Exile or just want to come watch somebody who's insanely masochistic and loves to play Path of Exile in the most strange way possible, we'd always welcome you to come over here and watch us play some Ruthless over here. But thanks so much for joining us today, everybody. If you've got suggestions or tips or tricks that you'd like to share with the rest of the community about Ruthless, you can always leave a comment down below. Thanks so much for joining us, and if you're playing regular Path of Exile, I hope today is the day a Mirror of Calandra drops for you, or if you're playing Ruthless, I just hope a support gem drops that you can actually use. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.